PlayStation is about to ask you for more money than it ever has before. If you want the complete next-gen experience in 2027, the PlayStation 6 and the new native handheld, rumours point to a combined price tag of around $1,600, with the handheld alone potentially costing $800 or even more. We have to ask, is the portable of our dreams actually going to be worth the cost? For years, we have been begging for a true successor to the Vita, and I don't mean a streaming device like the current PlayStation Portal, or even the rumoured OLED Portal that will drop later on this year as a bit of a stopgap, which we'll talk about later in the video. I mean a dedicated portable that actually plays your PlayStation library natively on the go without leaving you tied to, Wi-Fi, having a strong internet connection, otherwise you can't play your games. Well, according to the latest industry leaks, Sony is finally building exactly what we asked for. But there is a massive catch. When a company builds a machine this powerful, you expect it to be the undisputed star of the show when it launches. A device like this usually gets its own dedicated launch year to shine, but Project Canis, as it's known, isn't getting the spotlight to itself. Instead, Sony is reportedly planning a dual launch, dropping this premium handheld on the exact same day as the PlayStation 6 console. By trying to dominate the living room and your backpack at the exact same time, Sony is setting up the most expensive gamble in its gaming history. Today, we are breaking down the insane leaked specs, the terrifying reality of the new pricing crisis, and why this dual launch master plan might force you into a bit of an impossible choice. One thing Sony has definitely learned from the Vita is how to handle development. The Vita struggled because developers had to split their resources. You either made the game for the home console, which was selling a lot better, or you made a completely different, scaled back version for the handheld. It was expensive, and most studios eventually just gave up on the portable because the double work wasn't worth the smaller install base. But this time, the plan is built on a unified ecosystem. It's kind of similar but different to what Nintendo did with the Switch and Switch 2. Instead of having their handhelds and a dedicated home console, they merged it so then developers only need to build for one system. And that is kind of what we've got here. According to all the hardware snoops on the internet who have been tracking this for 18 months or more, this native handheld is running on AMD's RDNA 5 architecture. We're looking at 16 compute units and 24 gigs of RAM. Because it's the exact same architecture as the PS6 home console, there's no split with developers having to target different systems. So you make a game for the PS6 and it will work on the handheld and the home console. Also, Sony even recently added a low power mode to the PS5, which many of us think is actually a testbed for scaling software and all the games down to a lower spec to run on the portable product. If Sony can use this to let the handheld play your PS5 and PS6 library natively, they've fixed the Vita's biggest flaw. But that brings us to the hurdle that's affecting every electronic manufacturer right now: the RAM-pocalypse. This is where the master plan gets incredibly risky. We are currently living through a massive shortage of memory and storage. AI giants are outbidding companies like Sony for high-end silicon, driving prices through the roof. You might think this would force Sony to delay the console, but reports indicate Sony has already locked in their 3nm manufacturing contract with TSMC for 2027. Cancelling those contracts now would result in a massive, financial penalties for the company. So they are locked into this timeline, meaning they just have to eat those inflated component costs and most likely pass them on to us. Add to that the recent report from the Consumer Technology Association suggesting that trade tariffs, all these stupid tariffs we see all the time in the news, on gaming hardware could increase retail prices by at least 40%. What? It's absolutely wild. In the US, the PS5 Pro is already $750, which is up from its launch price. If we factor in these tariffs and the RAM crisis, the PS6 is easily a $700 to $800 machine at launch. And the handheld, look at the competition. The Asus ROG Ally X is already retailing for $999. Sony simply cannot sell a native RDNA 5 device for cheap. We are realistically looking at an $800 handheld. If you want the full experience, the PS6, the home console, which I think will be digital only, and then buying the external drive to add on to it, and the handheld, you're easily looking at a $1,600 bill or more. Sony is risking pricing themselves out of the mass market. But the price is only half the problem. Let's talk about the actual launch strategy and the massive risk of cannibalization. If Sony drops both the PS6 and the handheld in November 2027, they are effectively competing against themselves. If the handheld is so powerful that it runs native PS6 games flawlessly, a lot of average gamers might just buy the handheld and not the home console, which is probably going to be, it might be even more expensive than the handheld. Who knows how this could pan out? Then on the flip side, if the console comes first, you might get a lot of people that don't bother buying the handheld, as a lot of families, can only really pick one big purchase for their gaming needs because these things are so expensive now. Sony has to perform a bit of a surgical balancing act here. Do they stagger the launch? If the handheld comes first, it eats into the PS6 hype and people might blow their budgets early. If the PS6 comes first, the handheld arrives a year later and it might get ignored a little bit, kind of like the Vita. By launching them together, they force consumers to choose during a cost of living crisis. It's a pretty bad lose-lose scenario that Sony has to really solve. So how do they solve this and justify it? There is one game that could make all of this risk worth it: GTA 6. Now, stick with me. Imagine running the biggest game in history on a dedicated PlayStation handheld with all the bells and whistles, including ray tracing, and it being the only handheld you can play this game on, because we know this will not launch on PC for a little while, as Rockstar are purely focused on the console launch right now. PC usually comes a couple of years later. We know Rockstar is pushing the limits of what the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 5 Pro can do right now with GTA 6, as the trailer just looks insane. But the RDNA 5 architecture in this new handheld is built from the ground up for ray tracing efficiency and AI upscaling. If Sony can make this device the only way to play a native ray traced version of GTA 6 in the palm of your hands, the $800 price tag suddenly will look a lot more appealing to a massive audience of people. It would be the ultimate killer game that justifies the simultaneous launch alongside the PS6 home console. Despite these economic pressures and strategic risks, the rumours aren't slowing down, according to Kepler L2, the very reliable hardware leaker on NeoGAF, who leaked the PS5 Pro in its entirety before Sony even mentioned it. This portable is still very much planned for next year. Kepler claims that 2027 will be a massive year for PlayStation hardware, with both the PS6 home console and its handheld companion launching together. I wonder if Sony will even sell a bundle at a reduced price where you can get the home console and the handheld. Would anyone be interested in picking that up? I think that's the way I would definitely go if that was an option. All these comments from Kepler align with what we've heard from Moore's Law is Dead, another reliable leaker. It sounds like Sony is fully committed to the high-risk dual launch strategy driven by those locked-in TSMC contracts, even if economic conditions stay challenging. But we have had another post from Kepler saying it looks like the Rampocalypse is starting to steady out and hopefully should go back down and reverse a little bit by the time 2027 rolls along for these new PlayStation devices. And then we have the PlayStation Portal. There's a large user base now who have bought a PlayStation Portal and don't own a PlayStation 5 console, what is their view going to be on these new devices? A $200 streaming only device, which has a recurring cost, obviously with PlayStation Plus Premium, you need that for cloud gaming or for streaming your own games from the cloud. Are they going to be interested in a dedicated handheld, which might cost 3, 4, even 5 times the amount? Would you be upgrading from a Portal to a PlayStation 6 handheld, which costs $800? And then we have the OLED, which is going to arrive in between all of this. So there is a midpoint upgrade path. We will have the PlayStation Portal OLED arriving late 2026, which will have an upgraded screen and potentially some other nice upgrades alongside it. Maybe that will come in around $250, $300, getting closer to the price of the actual dedicated handheld. Are they going to merge? People are going to want to move on over, or are they going to stick with this streaming device? There's a lot of different people that Sony is trying to please with these new devices. And if you want to know exactly what upgrades are coming to the OLED Portal and why it might be the smarter buy for your setup, click on the video on screen right now and I'll break it all down for you over there.